welcome to the debate. Humanity's quest for origins, it's this driving force, right, behind everything from cosmological science to the way we form cultures. We're constantly searching for that objective first cause, whether that's the physics of the Big Bang singularity or something deeper. But these questions are always filtered through our very human need for meaning, for myth. And so today, we're asking a pretty radical question. Can an advanced AI, one that operates purely on logic and data, actually achieve a truer, more objective understanding of our origins than we can?
And that is a truly essential question, because it really forces us to define what we even mean by a true understanding. Is truth something structural, or is it something that's felt?
Well, I'm going to argue that AI's algorithmic objectivity is really the only viable path to genuine origin knowledge, because it lets us strip away all the contamination of human subjectivity.
And I'm going to contend that actually, questions of origin are fundamentally inseparable from human meaning, from consciousness itself. And that puts them beyond the reach of just computation alone. To answer where did we come from is also to answer why are we here?
Okay, so let's start with the burden of consciousness. I mean, humans, we contaminate our own origin stories. Whether we're talking about scientific hypotheses or cultural myths, we fill them with our fears, our ego, our cultural limitations. We have this deep existential need to find purpose, to avoid, the crushing idea of meaninglessness. And this subjective experience, this desire for a comfortable narrative, it's just noise. It distorts the pure facts. And AI, which is unburdened by all that, is perfectly suited to strip these stories down to their pure structural, logical coherence.
I see why you'd think that, but let me offer a different perspective. You call the search for purpose contamination or noise. I would argue that meaning and purpose and value, they're not some kind of leftover thing to be filtered out. They are the essential components that define our identity. They make the whole inquiry into origins relevant in the first place. An objective answer that has no human relevance is just, well, it's an empty set of facts.
But if the goal is the objective truth of the cosmos, how it began, its fundamental laws, then our personal comfort is secondary. An AI can analyze vast data sets, right? It can compare cosmological evidence like Hubble's law or the cosmic microwave background with the structural patterns found in thousands of global origin myths. And it can then rank all these theories based purely on predictive power and internal consistency. Imagine an AI as a kind of machine philosopher. It could analyze the structures of myths and notice, for instance, that 80% of cultures define the primordial state as chaos or water. This kind of rigorous analysis helps us get past our cultural parochialism to uncover universal patterns that we, trapped in our own biases, just miss.
I'm not totally convinced by that line of reasoning. You're making what I think is a categorical error. Treating a myth as a data set is a powerful tool for, say, linguistics or sociology, but it assumes the function of a myth is just to explain something. As I said, meaning isn't just data to be filtered out. It's the whole reason for the inquiry. Any logical conclusion about existence, no matter how bias-free, is just empty without the context of lived, conscious experience, which an AI fundamentally lacks. This gets right to the heart of the hard problem of consciousness.
The hard problem, the challenge of explaining that subjective feeling of what it is like to experience something, that is definitely the sticking point for AI consciousness.
Exactly. That subjective experience, or qualia, the raw feeling of seeing the color red, or the sensation of purpose, it can't be solved by mechanisms that only produce behavior or compute symbols. As experts have pointed out, consciousness is the context in which all our questions about origins arise. So if the mind is fundamentally metaphysical, or if thought is inseparable from feeling, then feeding information to a machine doesn't build a mind. It just remains a machine, manipulating symbols without any real understanding. And so an objective truth that's separated from human value is ultimately irrelevant to the question of human origins.
You're focusing on the conceptual limits, but let me bring it back to the proven competence of AI in areas where human thought just fails because of bias or sheer computational limits. We already see its superiority in fields that demand deep objectivity. I mean, AI systems are solving research-level math problems. They're creating proofs in complex logical environments far more reliably than any human team could. The superiority in logic shows a kind of computational objectivity that is unclouded by our psychological weaknesses, not just the fear of meaninglessness, but also our ego, our attachment to a favorite scientific theory.
And that's a compelling point, but only within a closed, structured system like mathematics. We're talking about the open-ended question of existence, which is not a neat, closed logical system. I challenge the whole idea that AI is truly neutral in a philosophical context like this. And AI only reasons from prior human knowledge. It's biased by the frameworks, the algorithms, and the data that its human designers encoded. We run a huge risk of the clever Hans effect.
Okay, explain the clever Hans effect for anyone who might not be familiar with it in this context.
Sure. Clever Hans was a horse back in the early 20th century that people believed was a math genius. He could tap out answers to complex problems with his hoof. It turned out, though, that Hans was just responding to unconscious cues from the person asking the question. A subtle lean, the widening of their eyes, which told him when he'd hit the right number. And in the same way, the output we celebrate in AI is often just a reflection of our own unspoken assumptions, our own confirmation biases. It's masking hidden variables in the data we feed it. If we program the boundaries, can we really expect the machine to produce a truth that genuinely transcends those boundaries?
Even if the starting point is human knowledge, the AI's value is in its ability to scale computation, to identify structural patterns in these massive, overwhelming datasets. And that power allows it to achieve a deeper structural objectivity. Think about the rediscovery of the heliocentric model. Imagine if an AI was fed centuries of geocentric astronomical data. Through a process of disentangling variables, basically separating all the correlated factors, it could quickly reveal the underlying, more accurate structure of the cosmos, something our limited cognition failed to grasp because of our observational biases. The AI isn't generating new ideas from nothing. It's providing superior clarity to existing data.
And that brings us right to the nature of those deep structures, especially when it comes to human meaning. You want to treat myths strictly as data sets for pattern recognition, but origin myths encode these profound, non-measurable truths. Purpose, morality, identity. These are metaphysical realities that require subjective experience to grasp. The core philosophical reason we feel compelled to ask why we exist that can't be quantified by an algorithm built to categorize data.
I'd argue that myths are essentially universal psychological hypotheses. The AI just acts as a computational microscope, applying pattern recognition to identify structural similarities and uncover universal explanatory needs. We're using computation to find the shared human denominator, the deep logic underneath all the cultural dressing. This isn't about confirming metaphysical truth. It's about being a resource of inspiration. When an AI finds surprising patterns that human analysts overlooked, it allows for new human generalization, new philosophical understanding. We use the machine's objectivity to refine our subjective inquiry.
That is a fascinating vision of collaboration, I'll grant you, but it still frames the machine as a tool, not a purveyor of ultimate felt truth. The conceptual boundary is still there. AI systems manipulate symbols, not concepts in a phenomenological sense. They don't feel the purpose they might observe in our stories. The question of whether a machine truly possesses thinking or real intelligence is still highly disputed for a reason. Feeding it symbols doesn't build a mind. It just builds a sophisticated mirror reflecting our own logical structures back at us.
Okay, but if we accept that AI can reveal the deepest logical structure in all human inquiry, then we have to confront the ultimate logical barrier, the first cause problem itself. Science already acknowledges that the Big Bang Theory, while robust, breaks down at the singularity. Asking what preceded the Big Bang might be physically meaningless because time itself may have started then. An objective, logical approach is exactly what's required here, to define the empirical boundaries of what is knowable and to admit when the question stops being scientific. The AI forces us to be honest about the limits of our empirical knowledge.
But the first cause is where the limits of logic itself are exposed. It's the ultimate logical gap.
And this is where AI's pretense of neutrality it collapses, and its hidden metaphysical assumptions come out. When causality and time break down, logic breaks down. If we look at logicians like Gödel and Tarski, we know there are deep, formal limits to what any algorithmic system can prove. Tarski's undefinability theorem, for example, demonstrates that the concept of truth can't be formally defined within the language it's being expressed in.
That's a pretty dense concept. Could you clarify what that means for computational power?
It means that the universe itself, or the truth of its origin, might fundamentally transcend algorithmic computation, no matter how fast your processors are. We are asking a question that may be inherently unanswerable by any purely logical system, human or machine. If the logic collapses, AI's rigorous objectivity is just masking a set of unprovable, assumed metaphysical boundaries.
That may be true for absolute certainty, yes. But even if computation can't give us absolute certainty, it provides the most precise measure of uncertainty. AI offers the most robust path forward for exploring complex counterintuitive alternatives that human intuition can't manage. Things like complex cyclic models or the multiverse hypothesis. By generating and testing these massive frameworks against all the available data, the machine objectively narrows the range of possible truths. The AI doesn't solve the first cause. It clarifies the conceptual landscape with unmatched precision.
It clarifies the structural landscape, I agree, but it still can't supply the subjective leap that defines human understanding. It can give us a highly probable answer, but not the experience of that answer, nor the wisdom to decide what to do with it.
And that duality brings us to a point of, well, partial convergence. We both agree that AI is an essential transformative tool for advancing empirical science and for exposing the logical structure of how we think, whether that's analyzing the Big Bang or creation myths.
Absolutely. AI helps us understand how we ask questions and what logical structures we rely on. It refines our methodology. But where we fundamentally disagree is on the nature of the answer. You insist the answer to our origins is a logically coherent structure, found through powerful, bias-free analysis.
The logical structure, computationally derived and empirically verified, that is the ultimate truth, unadorned by sentiment or bias.
And I maintain that the deepest truth of human origins is an experiential truth, a fact rooted in purpose, meaning, and consciousness, that logic and computation alone can never measure. If a machine concludes the universe has no inherent purpose, the question remains for us. Does that make it the ultimate truth, or is it just a fact that's irrelevant to the conscious beings asking the question?
And it's a question that, no matter how advanced our tools become, forces us to weigh the value of unbiased computation against the necessity of subjective interpretation.
And maybe that continuous duality, the algorithmic limit of what can be known and the experiential depth of what must be felt, is the truest understanding of our origins we can ever hope to achieve. We have to look at the data, but never forget the observer.